The fluorescent lights hum overhead like tired machinery, casting that particular shade of institutional white that exists in exactly two places, airports and hospitals. Laura Bennett arrives at Mercy General in Norfolk at 5:53 in the morning, 12 minutes before her shift officially begins. The cold air hits her face as she pushes through the employee entrance, and her hands move through the familiar ritual without thought: badge scan, hand sanitizer, the specific walk down corridor B that avoids the main floor traffic. 6 months she has been doing this. 6 months of being nobody, which is precisely the point. The supply closet in the basement smells like antiseptic and old cardboard. She pushes the metal cart inside and begins her work with a kind of precision that comes from muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. Bedpans in the autoclave. Trauma kits organized by size and urgency. Morphine vials counted 3 times, logged twice. Her fingers move with surgical steadiness as she arranges for kits in the cabinet, each catheter gauge sorted and labeled, each syringe placed exactly parallel to the one beside it. This is not just stock rotation. This is how someone who has held intestines inside a soldier's abdomen while calling for helicopter extraction organizes supplies. Methodical. Efficient. Ready. She notices the discrepancy at 6:27. The invoice sits on the bottom shelf, partially hidden beneath a stack of thermometers. Purchase order number 7748H, dated 3 weeks ago. Dr. Sterling's signature. A GE Logic ultrasound system ordered for $17,400. The serial number on the equipment manifest does not match the serial number on the actual machine 3 shelves above it. She pulls down the second invoice. Same problem. Phantom equipment. Ghost purchases. Money moving in directions it should not move. Laura photographs the invoices with her phone. 3 images, steady hands, no hesitation. The kind of hands that do not shake under pressure anymore because they have already shaken themselves empty in a Baghdad field hospital. She slides the papers back under the thermometers and returns to the trauma kits. Her heart rate stays exactly where it belongs. Pain is data. Discrepancies are just information. The footsteps come at 6:34. Dr. Richard Sterling appears in the doorway like he owns the space, because in his mind, he does. 42 years old, 6'2", the kind of surgeon who refers to himself as a clinician entrepreneur at hospital galas. His vacation home in the Outer Banks cost $430,000 on a salary that should never have afforded it. He stops in the doorway and watches Laura work. She does not look up. She does not need to see his face to know what the pause means. Recognition. Assessment. Threat identification. Find everything you need, Bennett. His voice is silk over steel, the tone a man uses when he already knows the answer he wants to hear. Laura sets the clipboard down on the metal counter. The sound it makes is thin and precise. She turns to face him, meeting his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. The same measured stare she once used on insurgents at checkpoints outside Fallujah. No fear in it. No submission either. Just acknowledgement that she has seen his game before, in different uniforms, under different suns. All accounted for, she says quietly. Sterling picks up the clipboard. His eyes move across her notes with the intensity of someone who understands he is being read. He scans the equipment inventory, the medication counts, the section headers marked with her specific organizational system. The muscles around his jaw tighten very slightly. He has found what he suspected: she is capable. She is thorough. She notices things. She is, by definition, a problem. Thorough, he says, setting the clipboard back down. Maybe too thorough. Laura walks past him without responding. The faded unit patch sewn inside her scrub jacket lining brushes against her ribs like a scar tissue memory. She has been sewn inside other jackets before. She knows what invisibility feels like. She knows what it costs. The basement corridor stretches behind her, fluorescent lights casting no shadows, the ventilation system wheezing through metal ducts overhead. Sterling does not follow. He does not need to. He has already made the calculation. A quiet nurse. Mid-40s, no family files in HR, references that check out but feel somehow hollow. A woman who wipes down bedpans with surgical precision and organizes trauma kits like she has done it in the dark. A woman who photographs phantom equipment invoices when she thinks no one is watching. By 6:45, Sterling is in his office on the 4th floor, reviewing the invoice discrepancies himself. $17,000 for the ultrasound. $23,000 for ventilator equipment that he ordered directly from a distributor who is very amenable to receiving partial payments in the form of speaking fees at conferences that do not actually exist. $40,000 total per month, routed through 3 different hospital accounts, each one technically legal and completely fraudulent. The vacation home costs money. Expensive taste costs money. And Bennett has now seen enough of the machinery to become inconvenient. He makes a note in his calendar. Action items. Timeline. Contingencies. The man who builds houses on kickback schemes thinks like a chess player because he has to. One mistake, one careless employee who asks too many questions, and the entire structure collapses. Bennett has seen the invoices. She has photographed them. She has the kind of hands that do not shake, which means she is not afraid, which means she is not easily intimidated or bought or scared into silence. He will need to build a file. Disciplinary issues. Character concerns. Medication count discrepancies, late charting, anything that adds up to grounds for termination before she can connect the dots about the equipment orders. The strategy is old but effective. Create enough smoke to obscure the fire, then remove the person who noticed the flames in the first place. What he does not know is that the woman wiping down bedpans has held a perimeter alone for 40 minutes while extracting wounded operators under fire. What he does not know is that the faded unit patch inside her jacket lining was stitched from aircraft wreckage and shrapnel collected from a classified operation that, according to official records, never happened and she never participated in. What he does not know is that his vacation home was purchased with money that will eventually trace back to him, and that everything he has built on the foundation of phantom equipment will collapse with a single phone call from the right person at the Pentagon. But at 6:45 in the morning at Mercy General Hospital, none of that matters yet. Laura finishes her supply closet inventory at 7:12 and moves upstairs to the ICU. Shift change is happening, day nurses replacing night nurses, coffee being poured, computers being accessed, the morning machinery of a hospital grinding into gear. She pushes a clean cart into the medication room and begins restocking. Her phone buzzes at 7:19. A text message from a number she has not heard from in 3 days. Marcus, Mom, Riker's been admitted. Room 7. His halo went down near Jalabad but he's stable. They're running full diagnostics now. Captain James Riker. Special Forces. Marcus's commanding officer. The man who made the promise that every mother's son needs to hear, I will bring him home alive. The same man who disappeared for 3 weeks after the convoy outside Kandahar and came back moving differently, speaking in a way that suggested too much had changed to ever fully repair. And now he is in ICU Room 7 at Mercy General, which means his condition is something more than stable. Something close enough to critical that they brought him to the trauma center. Laura has been cleaning bedpans in for 6 months. She sets her phone down on the counter beside the morphine vials. Her hands are still steady. Her heart rate is still exactly where it should be. But the invisible line that has kept her compartmentalized and separate and hidden has just become very thin. The man in Room 7 is connected to her son in ways that military hierarchy does not quite capture. If Riker crashes, if something goes wrong, if he needs exactly the kind of emergency medical intervention that a woman with her background could provide, then all of her invisibility becomes worthless. She picks her phone back up. I'll check on him during rounds, she types, then deletes. She tries again, good. Stay focused. Also wrong. She settles on something simpler, copy that. 3 letters. Military language. A acknowledgement that she understands the situation without revealing that she understands it completely. She slides her phone into her scrub pocket and returns to the medication restock. Around her, the ICU hums with the sound of machines monitoring the barely living. Ventilators wheeze their mechanical rhythms. Heart monitors beep their steady progress. Somewhere 4 floors above her, Dr. Sterling is beginning to build the file that will destroy her career. And somewhere in room 7, the commanding officer of her son's unit is lying in a hospital bed with injuries that nobody has fully explained, waiting for the kind of care that only a few people in the world know how to provide. The $100 bet echoed across Mercy General's cafeteria like a gunshot. Dr. Sterling stood at the center table during lunch rush, his voice projecting across the crowded room with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced consequences. "I'm making this official," he announced, loud enough for 40 staff members to turn and stare. $100 says Nurse Bennett quits within a week. Any takers? Laura sat alone by the window, her fork halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly, carefully, as if the gesture required all her concentration. A resident 2 tables over whispered something to his colleague. Sterling grinned, that particular smile of a man who'd just proven his dominance to an audience. "Just calling it like I see it," he continued, loud enough that she could hear every word without effort. "Some people aren't built for real medicine." She took one measured breath. Then another. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song above her head. She wiped her mouth with a paper napkin, a small gesture, precise, deliberate. One tear escaped down her left cheek. Not from fear. Not from shame. From the sheer effort of restraint, of holding back the weight of 18 years compressed into a single moment. She wiped it without breaking eye contact with her tray, stood, carried her dishes to the return station, and walked out in complete silence. The room stayed quiet long enough for everyone to hear the cafeteria door hiss shut behind her. Sterling's laughter followed her into the hallway. What he didn't know was that the faded unit patch sewn inside the lining of her jacket bore the insignia of a woman who'd held a perimeter alone in Fallujah with nothing but a rifle and the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. But she'd learned how to disappear. How to fold herself small. How to let men like Sterling believe their own narratives. 2 days later, Sterling found her in the medication room during the afternoon shift. The room was narrow, lined with locked cabinets and the smell of antiseptic that never quite masked the underlying scent of fear of mistakes, of regulatory violations, of careers ending in a single miscounted vial. She was recounting the fentanyl stock when he appeared in the doorway. "You're short 2 vials, Bennett," he said, his voice carrying the false certainty of someone who'd already made up his mind. "That's a DEA violation. I'm documenting this." She opened her mouth. Closed it. Recounted with him watching, his presence making the air pressure change, like a predator circling, waiting for weakness. The count was correct. Every vial accounted for. She showed him the paperwork, the timestamps, the signatures. He shrugged, the gesture almost generous. "My mistake. But I'm still writing you up for defensive behavior." She didn't argue. Arguing would confirm something in his mind, would give him the reaction he was hunting for. Instead, she nodded once and continued her work as if he'd already left the room. The real cruelty came on day 6. Laura carried her lunch tray through the packed cafeteria during the shift change, when the room was loudest, when the maximum number of witnesses could see what happened next. Sterling stood near the beverage station, apparently studying the coffee selection. As she passed, he accidentally bumped her from behind, a hard collision, deliberate as a body check. Her tray crashed to the floor. The sound was tremendous. Soup spreading across tile like a wound. Salad scattered. Silverware clattering in a discordant percussion that made conversation stop. The room froze. Everyone turned. Sterling watched her with the satisfied expression of a hunter who'd finally driven his prey into open ground. Then he tossed a patient chart at her feet. Paper spilled everywhere, mixing with the mess on the floor. He stood over her, smirking, waiting. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he said. The word hung in the air like a slap. Laura knelt slowly. She gathered the scattered pages with movements that were careful, methodical, controlled, not trembling, though every cell in her body was remembering desert heat and the weight of a rifle and the specific sound a perimeter makes when it's about to collapse. She rose, chart clutched against her chest, and met his eyes without blinking. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken battles. "I've treated gunshot wounds with steadier hands than you'll ever have, Doctor." Then she walked away. Sterling's laughter followed her again, loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough that he didn't notice the subtle shift in the room, the way some people's expressions changed, the way a few staff members looked at her with something different in their eyes. He was too busy winning. He had no idea that the patient in ICU Room 7, just admitted with post-operative complications from a training accident, was Captain James Riker. Not just any captain. The man who commanded her son's Special Forces unit. The man who'd made a promise to a 17-year-old kid before deployment, "I'll bring you home alive. You have my word." That night, Laura worked the 1800 to 0600 shift, deliberately routing her rounds through the 3rd and 4th floors, avoiding the ICU entirely. She could feel the weight of that room pulling at her like a current, but she pushed against it, kept moving, kept her head down. At 2,347 hours, her phone buzzed while she was restocking the crash cart. A text from Marcus, her 17-year-old son, "Mom, Captain Riker is at your hospital. Room 7. He asked about you." Her hands froze on a defibrillator paddle. The metal was cold against her skin. She typed back, "I can't." "You know why?" Marcus's response came within seconds, "He knows who you are. He remembers." She deleted both messages, pocketed the phone, and forced herself to breathe through the sudden pressure in her chest. The lights above her head buzzed their mechanical complaint. The crash cart held everything needed to bring a person back from the edge of death: drugs, equipment, tools designed for saving lives. But there were some resurrections that came with a cost too high to pay. At 01 for 7 hours, she was charting in the nurse's station when the ICU code alarm screamed. Not a drill. Not a practice alert. The real thing, harsh and urgent and undeniable. Room 7. Her body moved before her mind caught up. Muscle memory took over, the kind of instinct that doesn't ask permission. She was in motion before the overhead announcement finished, "Code Blue, ICU Room 7. All available personnel." She found Dr. Patel standing at Riker's bedside, frozen, useless. The monitors shrieked their terrible song. Blood pressure, 60/40 and dropping. Heart rate 140 and climbing. Riker's neck veins distended, his face the color of old concrete. His breathing shallow, labored, the sound of a man drowning in his own body. "Cardiac tamponade," Laura said. Her voice, when she spoke, had shed every layer of civilian softness. It carried the precision of someone who'd made these decisions before, who'd lived with the consequences. Pericardial bleed from the chest trauma. "We have maybe 3 minutes." Patel stared at her. "We need cardiothoracic surgery. We need to call." "There's no time," she said. "Already moving. Already gloved." Positioning Riker's bed, her hand steady as a surgical laser. "Get me a cardiac needle. Ultrasound. Betadine. Now." Patel hesitated, and in that hesitation, she saw the weight of hierarchy, of protocols, of a system that preferred death on schedule to life on improvisation. "I can't authorize," he started. "Then watch him die," Laura said. She prepped Riker's chest herself. Found the ultrasound. Located the equipment. Didn't wait for permission that would arrive too late. Her fingers moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who'd done this in sandstorms under enemy fire, who understood that hesitation was another word for murder. The needle went in at the 5th intercostal space, midclavicular line. She felt the resistance of tissue, then the sudden give as the needle broke through into the pericardium. A hiss of air escaping. The backup of pressure releasing. Riker's oxygen saturation climbed, 68. 75, 82. 88. Stable. His blood pressure ticked upward, 70/40. 80/50. 95/60. The monitors shifted from their screaming panic to something almost approaching a normal rhythm. Sinus rhythm. Beautiful. Alive. Dr. Patel stood motionless, watching her work. Understanding, finally, what he was witnessing. Not a nurse. Something else entirely. Call cardiothoracic now, Laura said, her voice already transitioning back to deferential, already tucking itself away. Tell them we have a post-operative pericardial bleed. Stable for now, but they'll need to open him up in surgery. She stepped back from the bed and became, once again, just a nurse. The shift started at 1800 with deliberately routed assignments. Laura had requested the fourth-floor med-surg rotation, and the charge nurse, who pitied her, had granted it without comment. ICU Room 7 was in a different orbit now, cordoned off by her own choosing. She would not go there. She would not check on Captain James Riker, the man who'd promised her son he'd come home alive, the man now lying 70 feet down a corridor she'd learned to avoid the way soldiers avoid IEDs. Professional distance. Discipline. The same restraint that had kept her invisible for 6 months in scrubs instead of dress blues. The hours moved like hospital hours always did, medication passes, dressing changes, the endless cataloguing of small human deteriorations. At 23:47, restocking the crash cart on the 4th floor, Laura's phone buzzed against her scrub pocket. A text from Marcus, her 16-year-old, the one who'd been raised by grandparents while she'd been classified into oblivion. Her hand stilled on the ambu bag. She'd taught Marcus not to text her during shifts. She'd taught him protocols, compartmentalization, the military practice of not breaking radio silence unless the grid was on fire. The fact that he'd broken that rule meant the grid was burning. She texted back, *details. Marcus was a 16-year-old shadow of herself, observant, trained to notice things other people missed, capable of reading a tactical situation the way some kids read social media. If he detected a decline, it was real. Laura continued stocking the crash cart. Paddles. Defib pads. Medications in their slots like ammunition in a magazine. The work was automatic, which meant her hands could move while her mind was already running calculations, Riker's admission labs, his injury profile from the gunshot wound 4 days prior, the trajectory of infection in contaminated trauma, the way sepsis moved like an insurgent through a compromised system. She should not go to the ICU. She should work her shift and let the night resident handle it and maintain the fiction of being just a nurse. At 0153, the alarms began. She heard them from the 4th floor, a sound like something between a scream and a bell, the kind of alarm that makes every medical professional's nervous system flip to high alert. The overhead system crackled. The night resident's voice came through, high-pitched and uncertain, rapid response to ICU 7. Rapid response. Not code. Not full crash protocol. Not yet. Laura did not make a conscious decision. Her body simply moved the way it had moved 18 years ago outside Fallujah when mortars started landing in the grid, the way it had moved when a blowout Marine with a sucking chest wound had been dropped at her feet. She left the crash cart. She moved toward the elevators with the purposeful stride of someone responding to their assignment rather than someone running toward a patient she'd been avoiding. The ICU erupted in controlled chaos when she arrived. Alarms cascading like a cacophony of warnings. The monitors showed what Marcus had heard, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation declining, heart rate climbing past 140. But the pericardial monitor told the real story. The waveform was flattening, the electrical activity of the heart being compressed by something the chest X-ray hadn't shown, something the ultrasound had missed in the initial workup. The night resident, a second-year internal medicine doc named Chen, stood frozen at the foot of the bed, his hands trembling, his eyes wide. He'd never seen this before. He was reading protocols in his head and watching them not apply. Pericardial tamponade, Laura said. Not a question. A statement. Her voice had already changed, it had dropped an octave, dropped the courtesy. It was the voice of someone who'd given orders in the dark. Chen's head snapped toward her. What? No, the echocardiogram was clear 6 hours ago. Undetected bleed. Blunt trauma at the surgical site, probably started bleeding 4 hours ago, accumulated enough pressure to compress the ventricle. She was already moving to the ultrasound machine, her fingers moving with the muscle memory of a person who'd done this in field conditions worse than a climate-controlled hospital. Get me a cardiac needle. 14-gauge angiocath. Now. Chen didn't move. Now, Laura repeated, and the word was an order, clipped, absolute, the kind of command that bypassed questioning and moved directly into the nervous system. A nurse scrambled. Equipment appeared. Laura had done this 7 times under mortar fire in the surgical tents outside Fallujah, had threaded needles between ribs while the ground shook and incoming whistled overhead. The principle was identical: find the fluid, evacuate the pressure, restore cardiac output. The setting was irrelevant. The human anatomy was the same. She positioned the probe. There. The pericardial sac, dark with accumulated blood like a fist clenched around the heart. She marked the entry point, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the anatomical landmark burned into memory from 18 years of muscle. Riker's chest rose and fell with labored breath, his oxygen saturation at 78% and falling. Count from here, she said to the nurse. She placed her finger on his ribs. 1, 2, 3 ribs down from the top. This is where I'm going in. The cardiac needle was cold in her hand. 7 millimeters long, the needle like a thin lance. She visualized the pathway, through skin, through subcutaneous tissue, through the pericardial membrane, into the sac itself but not into the ventricle wall. The margin for error was millimeters. It always had been. She advanced the needle at a 45-degree angle, watching the ultrasound screen as the tip approached the fluid-filled space. The syringe was already attached. She felt the subtle pop as the needle penetrated the membrane, a sensation like breaking a seal, and then pulled back on the plunger. Dark blood filled the barrel. The first 20 milliliters changed everything. The blood pressure monitor beat louder, higher. Riker's eyes fluttered open. The monitor waveform shifted from the compressed, flattened appearance of tamponade to something that resembled a heartbeat again. By 40 milliliters, his oxygen saturation climbed to 88. By 60, the heart rate stabilized below 120, the rhythm sliding back toward something that belonged in a living human chest. She withdrew the needle. The syringe was full of dark aspirated blood, 60 milliliters of pressure that had been crushing his heart. She set it on the tray with the same careful precision she'd used inserting it. The monitors sang a different song now. Riker's hand reached out and caught her wrist. His eyes were open, still confused, still emerging from whatever haze sepsis and oxygen deprivation had dragged him through. But they focused. They found her face. Bennett, he whispered. His voice was sandpaper and exhaustion. Senior Chief Bennett. Marcus's mom. The room held its breath. That breath lasted 3 seconds. Then Chen was moving, was actually moving with purpose now, was calling for a chest tube setup and calling for the attending and calling for imaging to determine the bleeding source. But Riker's hand remained on Laura's wrist. I promised, he said. The words were barely audible. Promised I'd bring him home alive. You brought him home, Laura said. Her voice was level. You did your job. You brought me back, Riker whispered. She did not respond to this. She simply nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement that the debt had been registered, and then withdrew her hand because to stay would be to invite questions, to anchor herself to this moment in a way that couldn't be explained by anyone's official understanding of who she was. The next 3 hours were procedural. A thoracic surgeon arrived at 0245. Riker was prepped for the OR. The bleeding source, a tear in the right ventricle from the original injury, bleeding into the pericardial sac at a rate that should have killed him if the accumulation had continued for 2 more hours, was identified and sutured at 0320. By 0456, he was stable in the post-op recovery unit. The nurses there were competent. They'd manage his recovery. They'd call if anything changed. Laura charted the pericardiocentesis with hands that did not shake. She documented the exact time of needle insertion, the volume aspirated, the immediate improvement in vital signs. She wrote clinical notes that revealed nothing of how she'd known what to do, nothing of the 18 years compressed into a single decision at 0153 hours. At 0600, when the morning shift arrived and the night began to dissolve into day, Dr. Sterling entered the ICU with his coffee and his entitled stride, already running through the day's schedule in his mind. Dr. Patel intercepted him before he'd made it 3 rooms down the corridor. Dr. Sterling, we need to discuss what happened with Captain Riker last night. Sterling didn't break stride. The gunshot wound? He's stable now. I saw the post-op report. Nurse Bennett saved his life. Patel's voice was quiet. It was the voice of someone who'd watched something impossible and still couldn't explain it. He went into cardiac tamponade at 0153. I was frozen. The night protocols weren't working. She performed an emergency pericardiocentesis. Got 60 milliliters of blood out of the pericardial sac. Brought him back online in maybe 90 seconds. I've never seen anything like it. Sterling stopped moving. His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. The emotion that crossed his face was complex, fury, certainly, but underneath it something else. Calculation. Threat assessment. The recognition that something had shifted in the predator-prey dynamic he'd been constructing. She performed what? His voice had acquired an edge like a blade. A procedure that requires physician supervision. Patel hesitated. In that hesitation, Sterling saw the opening. Did you authorize that procedure, Dr. Patel? Did you explicitly authorize her to insert a needle into the pericardial sac? I know, but... Then she practiced beyond her scope of practice. She violated hospital protocol. I don't care if she was saving a life. Protocol exists for a reason. I want a full incident report detailing exactly what happened and when. On my desk by noon. Patel's face flushed. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd won an argument he didn't realize he was losing. Sterling continued to his office, already mentally drafting the calls he needed to make. The board president. The credentialing office. The external investigator. He pulled Laura's employment file from the secure records system, spread out her references, and began dialing the numbers listed on her initial hiring paperwork. The first number connected to a voicemail system with a mechanical female voice, invalid inquiry. This number is no longer in service. Please disconnect. He tried the second number. Same voicemail. Same message. He smiled. A person with fake references was a person with something to hide. A person with something to hide was a person whose life could be dismantled one carefully placed brick at a time. By 0800, he'd made the calls. By 1000, security had received orders to begin processing termination paperwork. By 11:30, Laura Bennett was being escorted from her shift, her badge removed, her access revoked, her future at Mercy General evaporating like morning mist. The security officer was apologetic. His name was Tom and he'd always greeted her with genuine kindness. I don't understand this, he said, holding the cardboard box that contained her locker. Stethoscope. Penlight. Spare scrubs. A single photograph of Marcus at age 10. You're one of the good ones. Laura took the box without comment. Her hands did not tremble. She did not protest. She simply signed the termination acknowledgement, her signature the same precise handwriting that had filled out incident reports in Kandahar, that had documented casualties in field hospitals, that had recorded the pulse rates of men whose names she'd never officially know. The rain had started sometime during the shift change. It hammered the glass doors as she walked out of Mercy General, each drop like a small percussion instrument, like applause for an ending that wasn't supposed to be an ending at all. She'd carried classified secrets for 18 years. She'd carried the weight of buried operations, of lives saved and lives lost under orders that couldn't be repeated. She'd carried a faded unit patch sewn inside the lining of a jacket she no longer wore. She realized as the rain soaked through her scrub jacket, still carrying everything that mattered. But now, there was nowhere to put it down. The cardboard box sat in the parking lot of Mercy General like a coffin for a life nobody knew existed. Laura's hands gripped the steering wheel of her 12-year-old Honda Civic, and she did not look back at the hospital. She did not need to. By 0800 that morning, while she was still clearing her locker, Dr. Sterling had already made his first call. The hospital board president answered on the second ring. Sterling's voice came through smooth as oil on water, urgent without panic. "Good morning, sir. I need to brief you on a credentialing crisis before the board meeting." What he didn't say was that he'd already been awake since 0400, making lists, activating his network like a man who understood that speed was his only advantage now. Laura Bennett had saved a life 18 hours ago, a decorated Special Forces officer, and in the military world that connected to the intelligence community that connected to people who asked questions. He had maybe 72 hours before someone official started asking about her background. He was going to bury her first. By 0930, Sterling had contacted for employment references that didn't exist. He had names, institutions, dates. Everything looked real because he'd built the files himself 3 months ago, anticipating he might need exactly this kind of insurance. When the board president's assistant called those numbers, they would reach disconnected lines. Red flags. Inconsistencies. The kind of hiring shortcuts that got hospitals sued. Sterling explained this clearly, each word placed like a brick in a wall. "I found these discrepancies during a routine credentialing review. Thought you should know before she contaminates the medical record any further." The board president's secretary called by 1000. She sounded worried. "Dr. Sterling, we're going to need to bring in an external investigator for the Bennett file. You've already documented concerns about protocols. Multiple concerns. And now potential fraud. I'll cooperate fully with the investigation." He said it like a man who had nothing to hide, like a man who was helping. By 1015, he had signed off on the investigator's scope of work. By 10:30, he was in the hospital cafeteria buying a coffee, and 3 staff members saw him looking relaxed, saw him nodding at colleagues like a man who had done the right thing. That was the performance. That was the art. Make them believe you were saving them. At 11:30, security found Laura in the medication room counting narcotics, the job that had become her entire world, the small careful work that kept her invisible. A guard she recognized from the lobby, whose name she had never learned, appeared in the doorway with the careful politeness reserved for people you were about to destroy. "Ms. Bennett, we need you to come with us." She did not ask why. She did not ask questions. She closed the medication drawer, removed her badge, and followed him to the security office where a woman in a grey suit was waiting with a folder. The folder contained her entire employment history, printed on hospital letterhead, with margin notes in red pen. Falsified references. Employment gaps unexplained. Credentialing violations. The external investigator had worked fast. 5 days. That was all it took to build a case against a ghost. "You're terminated effective immediately," the woman said. Her voice was professional, which meant she'd done this before, which meant she didn't care. "For falsified employment history and credentialing violations. This letter explains your rights and severance options." Laura read the letter. 34 words explaining that everything she had built here was fabricated. That her hiring had been improper. That she was a fraud. The letter did not mention that she had saved a man's life. The letter did not mention anything except the lie Sterling had built so carefully that even the truth couldn't touch it. She signed 3 copies, placed her hospital badge on the desk, the badge with her picture, the one that said Hel Bennett, RN, and asked one question: "My locker? Security will box your personal items and place them in your vehicle." She walked to the parking lot alone. The sun was high and brutal, and the asphalt was hot enough to shimmer. she stood by her car and watched security carry out a cardboard box containing 6 months of her life, a pair of compression socks, a sweater she'd left in her locker 2 weeks ago, a coffee mug that said best mom that Marcus had given her years ago, 3 books on trauma medicine, a pair of gloves she'd embroidered with her initials, old habits from a life when she used her real initials. Then she saw him in the window of his office on the 3rd floor. Dr. Sterling. He was watching her from above like a man observing an execution he'd ordered. He was not celebrating. He was simply confirming that she was gone. That the threat had been neutralized. That he could go back to his phantom equipment invoices and his vacation home and his perfect life, knowing that the woman who had seen too much would never surface. Laura got in her car. She did not drive home. She did not call Marcus, who was trying to reach her phone. She could see the missed calls accumulating, 5, 6, 7, and she did not answer because she had no words that would fit in a phone call. Instead, she drove to the Norfolk VA hospital, the place where she had trained as a medic 17 years ago, before Baghdad, before everything got classified. She parked in visitor parking and walked through automatic doors that whooshed open like a mouth swallowing her whole. The waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee and something else, old pain, maybe, or old hope. There were maybe 20 people sitting in plastic chairs that had been bolted to the floor so nobody could steal them. A man with one leg was reading a 2-month-old magazine. Another veteran had burned scars covering half his face and one arm, and he was staring at nothing. A woman in a wheelchair had bandages on both hands and her eyes tracked nothing, just gazed at the fluorescent lights above without blinking. Laura recognized 2 of them. A Marine captain she'd treated in a field hospital in Baghdad in 2009, 12 years ago. A sergeant from the 82nd Airborne who'd taken shrapnel in his left leg and whom she'd kept conscious for 90 minutes on a litter while waiting for medevac. They didn't recognize her. People don't look twice at a woman in street clothes, tired, hollow-eyed, wearing yesterday's scrubs under a jacket that smelled like bleach. She took a number from the intake desk. 47. The digital board displayed 12. 35 people ahead of her. She sat between a Marine with a service dog and an Army sergeant missing 3 fingers on his right hand. The service dog was alert, trained to notice when the Marine was about to have an episode. The sergeant was reading the same magazine the one-legged man had finished. Nobody looked up. The intake form was 7 pages long. Military service history. Laura left it blank because her military service did not exist on any official record. Employment status. She checked the box for unemployed. Address. She wrote her apartment on Bay Street, the 1-bedroom she and Marcus shared, the one where she'd spent 6 months being invisible. Next of kin, Marcus Bennett, 18, he was 18 now, she'd missed when he turned 18, she'd been working doubles to stay away from the apartment where she kept her shadow box hidden in the attic, locked in a footlocker that nobody should ever open. Reason for visit, the form had check boxes. Mental health services. Pain management. Medical evaluation. Substance abuse support. She stared at the check boxes and could not check a single one because none of them described what was wrong with her. She was not mentally ill. She was not in pain. She was not using. She was simply unemployed and erased and invisible, and she'd been invisible so long she'd forgotten what happened when a person tried to surface. At 15:20, the board displayed her number. 47. She stood and walked to the intake window. The clerk was a woman in her 60s, tired eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen 10,000 people in crisis. "Why are you here today?" Laura opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again and nothing came out. The clerk waited. She was patient the way nurses are patient, the way people who've been wounded are patient. "I don't know," Laura whispered finally. "I just didn't know where else to go." The clerk gave her a folder with an appointment card inside. 6 weeks out. The waiting list was long. She should call if her condition worsened. If she had suicidal ideation, she should go to the emergency department. She nodded, took the card, and left without being seen. She did not check in. She did not sit with a psychiatrist. She simply walked back to her car and drove home. Marcus was waiting on the couch when she got there. She could see him through the apartment window, 17, almost 18, sitting in the dark with something on the table in front of him. Something wooden. Something that caught the light. Her shadow box. The one she'd hidden in the attic under 2 layers of insulation and a false panel. The one that contained the bronze star and the purple heart and the navy cross that proved everything Sterling had said about her was a lie. He looked at her as she came through the door. His eyes were red. His voice was steady. "Mom, they need to see these." She stared at the medals. At the navy cross that cost her 40 minutes of holding a perimeter alone while enemy fire shredded the air around her, while she kept 3 wounded operators alive by refusing to let go. At the purple heart she'd earned for shrapnel in her right shoulder and a concussion that still made crowds feel dangerous. At the bronze star for the 23 lives she'd saved in one operation because she was smart and she did not panic and she understood that pain is data. "If I surface," she said quietly, "I violate orders. If I violate orders, people die." Marcus picked up the shadow box. His hands did not shake. "Captain Riker is alive because you surfaced. And Sterling is destroying you because you're invisible. He wins either way unless you decide to stop choosing invisibility." She wanted to argue. She wanted to explain the classified protocols, the government agreements, the reasons that her past had to stay buried. Instead, she looked at her son who was braver than she was, and she said nothing. He placed the medal box on the coffee table, and they both stared at it like it might detonate. "I'm going to the hospital board meeting tomorrow," Marcus said. "It's at 1400. Captain Riker asked me to come. You can come or not, but I'm bringing these." The Mercy General Hospital boardroom filled with the soft hum of fluorescent panels and camera equipment, the kind of professional staging that happens when institutional reputation requires documentation. 12 board members sat in leather chairs facing a podium where Dr. Sterling was supposed to deliver his heroic exposure of credential fraud, the narrative already written in press releases, his vindication already framed. The board president checked her notes one final time. Sterling's attorney sat in the second row, confident, checking his watch. Security stood at the perimeter, ready to escort the problematic nurse out if she showed up. They'd already prepared the termination letter. The conference room doors burst open at 1438 hours. Marcus Bennett was 17, still wearing his school uniform, still carrying the weight of something that had sat in a cardboard box under his bed for 6 years. The shadow box caught the light as he walked, halting every board member in mid-breath. Behind him came Captain James Riker in a wheelchair, still pale from 3 days post-procedure, his movements careful but deliberate. 2 Navy SEAL commanders flanked him like bookends, dress uniforms sharp as knife edges, their presence shifting the air pressure in the room the way only combat-experienced men can. Marcus walked to the center of the table. He didn't wait for permission. "This is my mother," he said, and his voice cracked exactly once, the sound of a 17-year-old trying to carry something that belonged to warriors. He opened the shadow box. The medals caught light like captured stars. Senior Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett. The board president stood slowly. Her hands trembled. A board member reached for the shadow box. His fingers traced the ribbon of the bronze star with valor, the metal warm from Marcus's hands. He read aloud, voice unsteady, "For heroic and meritorious service under fire in support of combat operations, Baghdad, 2019. He lifted the next medal. The room went dead silent. Purple Heart. 2 instances of service-connected injury. His voice caught on the third. Navy Cross. For extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty in the face of enemy fire while extracting wounded personnel under sustained attack. Captain Riker's voice cut through the silence, and when a Navy SEAL speaks after 3 days of post-surgical recovery, the words carry weight that ordinary speech cannot carry. "I'm alive because of Senior Chief Bennett. I was going into cardiac arrest at 01 for 7 hours. She performed a pericardiocentesis, needle directly into the chest cavity to drain the blood compressing my heart. She did it at bedside without a surgical team, without a surgeon present, with the precision of someone who'd done it under fire in actual combat. He paused, and the machines keeping him functional hummed quietly. I flatlined twice during that procedure. She brought me back twice. One of the SEAL commanders stepped forward. He was a Master Chief, rank visible in the way he occupied space. Senior Chief Bennett received her Bronze Star for leading a team of 12 operators through hostile territory. She was 24 years old. He lifted each medal in sequence, his words crisp as snapped salutes. Purple Heart, first instance, gunshot wound to the left shoulder, refused evacuation, continued operations. Purple Heart, second instance, IED fragment to the ribs, taped her own chest cavity, continued operations. He held the Navy Cross up to the light. She held a perimeter alone for 40 minutes while extracting 5 wounded SEALs from a compromised position in Fallujah, Jolan district. Alone. 40 minutes. Enemy contact on 3 sides. The second SEAL commander spoke without emotion, the way men speak when they've seen things that don't need dramatization. I was one of the 5 operators she carried out. I wouldn't be here if she'd left. I wouldn't have met my daughter. Senior Chief saved that option for me. An FBI agent stepped forward from where he'd been standing quietly in the back corner. His badge caught the light when he moved. Dr. Sterling's investigator attempted to access classified military records under the national security protocols. That attempt triggered federal alerts. We've had billing fraud under surveillance at Mercy General for 3 months, $2.3 million in phantom equipment purchases and kickback schemes spanning for years. He opened a folder, slid photographs of receipts, purchase orders, a vacation home in Hilton Head purchased with cash. The investigators' breach also revealed that Senior Chief Bennett's records were sealed under national security classification in 2020. Any attempt to discredit her employment history without knowing that classification was, legally speaking, a federal crime. Sterling's face had gone the color of old concrete. His attorney was already packing his briefcase. A 2-star admiral stood from the back of the room, dress whites immaculate, ribbons indicating 43 years of service. He walked to the center with the measured pace of someone who'd commanded thousands. He looked at Sterling directly, the way superior officers have looked at subordinates since the concept of rank existed. You're terminated, effective immediately, for cause and pending federal charges. The words hung in the air like they'd been carved there. Hospital security will escort you from the building. Your medical license is under emergency suspension pending board review. You will not treat patients again while this investigation proceeds. The silence that followed was the kind that only happens when careers end in public. Security moved in, 2 officers, professional and wordless. They flanked Sterling as he stood, his attorney already moving toward the door, already making calls to defense lawyers. Staff members had lined the hallway outside the boardroom, nurses, technicians, housekeeping, everyone who'd witnessed the cafeteria incident, everyone who'd seen him throw charts and humiliate a woman who'd been saving lives the entire time. They watched him pass without speaking. Dr. Patel stood at the nurse's station with his arms crossed. The janitor who'd picked up scattered trays that day nodded slightly. One nurse, the one whose tray Sterling had knocked to the floor, stood in the corridor with her arms crossed, tears running silently down her face, and she didn't look away until he was gone. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It brought the hospital to its knees. But that wasn't the worst part for Sterling. The worst part came 2 weeks later when the State Medical Board began their formal investigation. When colleagues he'd mentored began testifying. When a resident produced text messages where Sterling called her the bedpan nurse and joked about how long until she cracks. When 3 other nurses reported identical fabricated disciplinary actions. When the criminal investigation expanded to include his tax records, his properties, the full architecture of his fraud. The State Medical Board revoked his license permanently on day 43. Meanwhile, Mercy General's board moved with the speed of institutions trying to correct catastrophic error. Laura was reinstated with full back pay, formal written apology, and something unprecedented, they created a new position designed entirely around her skill set. Director of Veteran Services, reporting directly to the CEO, authority to hire, budget control, program design. They were essentially asking her to build what should have existed all along. She accepted without ceremony. 6 months later, Laura Bennett stood in the White House East Room wearing her dress uniform for the first time in 7 years. The uniform fit like memory, like something that had always been part of her but had been waiting for permission to exist. Marcus stood beside her in a suit he'd borrowed from Captain Riker, the shoulders still a half-inch too wide but worn with the straightness of a young man whose mother had just received the Presidential Citizen's Medal from the sitting President of the United States. The citation mentioned saving Captain Riker's life. It mentioned 6 months of classified service. It mentioned her refusal to abandon her calling even when the government had asked her to erase herself. The President shook her hand, and he whispered something only she could hear, "Your country never forgot you, Senior Chief. We're sorry we asked you to forget yourself." The medal joined her shadow box, which now hung framed on the wall of her new office at Mercy General. The faded unit patch, the thing that had hidden inside her jacket lining for 6 years, now sat displayed beside her bronze star, her purple hearts, her Navy Cross. The patch was no longer a secret. It was a monument. She'd built the Veteran Services Program from nothing into a model that hospitals across the country were copying. For other veterans with sealed records now worked on her staff. She'd created a bridge program for combat medics entering civilian nursing. She'd hired a SEAL who'd gone deaf from an IED. She'd hired a Marine whose hand shook from TBI. She'd given them what she'd never had, a place where their past was an asset, not a liability. And 70 miles away in Richmond, in a dingy community college classroom, Dr. Sterling taught CPR basics to 19 disinterested students for $18.50 an hour, teaching a skill to people who would never know what real resuscitation cost. His medical license was gone. His law license came next when the investigation into his billing patterns revealed tax fraud. His wife had filed for divorce on day 19. The vacation home had been seized by federal agents. He'd moved into a studio apartment near the college, and no one asked him about his credentials anymore because he didn't have any. At Mercy General, in the cafeteria where it all began, Laura sat by the same window where she'd sat alone 6 months ago with a termination letter in her hands. Dr. Patel joined her, 2 cups of coffee, no invitation necessary. "What you said to Sterling that day," Patel began carefully. "About holding steadier hands. I think about that a lot." Laura sipped her coffee. "I learned something in Baghdad that took me years to understand." She looked out at the parking lot, the same lot where she'd sat in her car trying to decide if she could survive being invisible. "True class is what you do when the lights go out." She stood, returned to her office, and the faded unit patch was still there, framed beside everything else, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. The transformation was complete. The nurse had surfaced. The warrior had finally come home. Like, subscribe, and comment. Tell us what you would have done if you'd been in that boardroom when the medals came out.